Victor Hale fired me in the middle of a board meeting over a line he called nothing. One sentence in a $120 million contract I had spent 18 months building. I refused to sign it, and he erased me in front of the entire board. What he didn't realize was simple removing that line didn't fix the deal. It set a timer on it. Before continuing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if this story truly touches your heart. Leave your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Now let me explain further. My name is Daisy Knox, Senior Risk Architect. I don't chase deals, I design the systems that keep them legally alive. When this company nearly lost the agreement under regulatory pressure, I rebuilt everything: layered compliance, escrow triggers, and safeguards that only activate when something goes wrong. Victor Hale was the opposite. A headline-driven CEO, fast decisions, sharp suits. He believed problems disappeared if you pushed hard enough, and that people like me were just slowing him down. All this over one clause, he said, leaning back like it was a joke. Sign it. It's not a clause, I replied calmly. It's a liability trigger. A few executives shifted in their seats. Most stayed quiet. Victor didn't. You're overcomplicating this, he snapped. Sign it or step aside. I didn't touch the pen. I won't sign it. The silence broke instantly. Then you're terminated. Effective immediately. No review, no legal, just authority used loudly enough that no one would question it. I felt the weight of every hour I had put into that contract and let it go. It was structural. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked out while the room avoided eye contact. But at the door, I paused, turned slightly, and looked at the contract Victor had just signed without me. At that one line. Then I said quietly, "You just activated it." From that moment on, the story is no longer simple. What follows contains fictional elements and is AI-assisted to highlight the humanistic message and emotional experience. Hopefully, you'll find something for yourself. If not, take good care of yourself, and we'll see each other again later. 18 months. That's how long I spent building a system no one could see, but everyone depended on. I remember the pride first. When I was brought in, the $120 million deal was already unstable, flagged by regulators after a near failure. I rebuilt it from the ground up, 7 layers of compliance, each one designed to absorb pressure before it reached the surface. I structured safeguards that protected us through 3 major audits without a single violation. I sealed exposure risks worth $38 million before they could even be questioned. No headlines, no applause, just silence and stability. That was my job. Victor Hale didn't see it that way. To him, I wasn't an architect. I was overhead. Legal slows things down, he said more than once, tapping numbers on a screen like they were the only reality that mattered. He liked clean summaries, fast approvals, decisions that fit on one slide. The deeper the system, the less he trusted it, and the more I became inconvenient. At first, it was subtle. Meetings I wasn't invited to, emails I wasn't copied on, decisions finalized without review. Then it escalated. He started revising sections of the contract, directly removing clauses he didn't understand because they looked redundant. Each time I flagged it. Each time he ignored me. "You're over-engineering," he said once, not even looking up. But I wasn't over-engineering. I was containing risk he refused to see. And sitting there now, replaying every change he pushed through, I felt something shift. Not anger, something colder, something clearer. Because one clause stood out. The one he insisted was unnecessary. The one I refused to sign. And in that moment, I realized the truth. He didn't remove a safeguard. He triggered it. Silence followed me home, the kind that settles into your bones before you even notice it. I didn't cry, didn't call anyone, didn't try to explain what had just happened. I placed my bag by the door, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and opened my laptop. Not the company one, my own. I still had a copy of the contract, every version, every revision Victor had pushed through without understanding what he was touching. At first, I read it like I always did, methodical, detached, precise. My breathing steady, my mind quiet. Then, the numbers started shifting in my head. No bonus, No equity vesting. 18 months of work converted into zero. I paused, letting that settle somewhere distant. It didn't hurt the way people expect it to. Not yet. Because something else was forming. I scrolled back to the clause. The one he called nothing. Technical reassignment liability. Except it wasn't just liability. It was a conditional trigger tied directly to compliance validation and escrow authorization. Remove the control signature mine, and the system didn't approve. It paused. Automatically. I sat back, staring at the screen, replaying the moment he signed. Victor hadn't simplified the contract. He had severed the only recognized authority that allowed the funds to move, which meant the bank would do exactly what it was designed to do. Verify. Delay. Freeze if necessary. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, not typing, just tracing the logic I had built. Not revenge, just structure. Then my inbox refreshed. A new message appeared at the top of the screen. From the escrow bank. Subject verification status update. I opened it, eyes scanning the first line. And for the first time since I left that room, I felt something shift into focus. Escrow verification initiated. I exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in recognition. The system was awake. Every safeguard I had written was now running exactly as intended. And somewhere across the city, Victor Hale was about to learn what nothing really meant. And this time, there would be no one left to sign it back. By the next morning, the system had already started moving quietly, precisely exactly as I designed it to. I didn't log into anything. I didn't call anyone. I just watched. The escrow bank began its verification process on the full $120 million. Not unusual on the surface. These checks happen all the time. But this one was different. It wasn't routine, it was triggered. And triggers don't ask for permission. By mid-morning, the first requests went out. Compliance confirmation, authorization validation, signature alignment, my signature. Except I was no longer in the system. Terminated. Access revoked. Authority removed. Which meant the verification couldn't complete. I could almost picture the confusion on the other side, legal teams refreshing dashboards, analysts double-checking records, assistants forwarding emails with increasing urgency. The process wasn't failing, it was waiting. And waiting in finance is where tension begins. Victor, of course, didn't see it that way. I heard later through someone who still had the courage to text me that he waved it off in a meeting. Just a delay, he said. Push the bank. Because to him, everything responded to pressure. But systems like this don't respond to pressure. They respond to rules. By early afternoon, the partners started asking questions. Not casual ones. Formal requests. Written confirmations. They needed assurance that the compliance authority behind the deal was still valid. No one could give it, because the only person authorized to validate it had been removed from the structure entirely. And still, I did nothing. No emails, no warnings, no intervention. This wasn't sabotage, this was absence. Then, just past 3, the tone changed. A message circulated from one of the primary partners. Not a question this time, not a request, a decision. Short, direct, final. We are pausing execution. I read the line twice, not because I didn't understand it, but because I knew exactly what it meant. The system hadn't broken, it had locked. And Victor Hale was still trying to force a door that no longer recognized him. If you agree with the way I handled this by staying silent and letting the system enforce the rules instead of stepping in to fix their mistake, drop a 1 in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't action. It's knowing exactly when not to act. The first crack didn't sound like a collapse. It sounded like a delay report. But by the time it reached the executive floor, it had already become something else. The paused execution wasn't isolated. It began to ripple through cash flow projections, then into operational planning, then into revenue forecasts. Within hours, nearly 40% of the company's expected liquidity for the quarter was sitting in limbo, locked behind a verification process no one could complete. I read the updates without reacting. Not satisfaction in the loud emotional sense. Something quieter, colder. Recognition. because this was exactly how it was supposed to unfold. By late afternoon, the CFO stepped in. He wasn't dramatic about it. People in his position rarely are, but his tone shifted. Direct, focused. He flagged the exposure, outlined the cascading risk, and made a recommendation. Pause expansions. Reassess authority. Resolve compliance immediately. Victor dismissed it. It's temporary, he said. Push the bank harder. That was his answer to everything. Pressure, speed, control. But none of those applied anymore. Meanwhile, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring once before answering. A competitor? They didn't waste time. We're aware of what's happening, the voice said. Calm, measured. And we know who built that structure. Of course they did. Systems like mine don't fail quietly, they leave patterns. And patterns are easy to read if you know where to look. We'd like to talk, he added. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just listened. Because for the first time since I walked out of that boardroom, the balance had shifted. Not in noise. In leverage. Back at my former company, the pressure was building. Not from outside, but from within. Questions were turning into conclusions, assumptions into facts. And then someone finally saw it. The CFO. He traced the verification chain, followed the authority structure, checked the missing link, and realized something no one else had said out loud. There was only one valid signature left in that system. Mine. And I wasn't there anymore. Exactly 24 hours after I walked out of that boardroom, the system stopped pretending to be patient. It moved from delay to enforcement. The escrow account froze first. Not partially completely. $120 million locked behind a verification loop that could no longer resolve. Every scheduled release, every timed transfer, every downstream allocation stalled at the same checkpoint. Then the payment chains followed. Vendors didn't receive confirmation. Internal teams couldn't access allocated funds. Automated schedules began stacking failures quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Finance dashboards shifted from yellow to red in less than an hour. I didn't need access to see it. I could map it in my head. This wasn't chaos. It was sequence. By midday, the first partner pulled out. No announcement, just a formal withdrawal notice citing unverified compliance authority. The second followed within 40 minutes. The third didn't even wait for clarification. 3 exits. One after another. Each one tightening the pressure around the structure I had built and the gap Victor had created. Somewhere in that building, I imagined the tone changing, voices sharper, meetings overlapping, assistants running between offices with updates no one wanted to deliver twice. And then finally, the question I knew was coming. Why is everything stopping at once? Victor's voice. No longer confident. Not yet broken, but close. Because this wasn't a delay you could push through. This was a system that had reached a conclusion. I received another message, not from a competitor this time, but from someone still inside. Short. Unformatted. Urgent. Legal is reviewing the contract now. Of course they were. They had to. Because at this point, there were only 2 possibilities left: external failure or internal design, and mine didn't fail. Minutes later, a second message came through. Just one line. They found it. I didn't ask what. I already knew. Because buried in that contract on a line Victor had removed was the only mechanism that allowed the system to unlock. The only override. And without it, everything else was just procedure doing exactly what it was built to do. If you believe everything that just happened was inevitable, the natural consequence of removing a critical safeguard, drop a 1 in the comments. Sometimes outcomes like this aren't accidents. They're simply systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. By the time the board called the emergency meeting, the situation had already moved past control and into accountability. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. I knew exactly how it would unfold. 12 directors, 1 crisis, and a CEO who needed someone else to blame. Victor started fast. This is a systems failure, he said according to the message I received minutes later. Daisy Knox over-engineered the contract. We're dealing with unnecessary restrictions. Of course he said that. It was easier than explaining what he didn't understand. But this time, the room didn't move with him, because the numbers didn't support him. 40% of projected liquidity frozen. 3 partners gone. Legal exposure expanding by the hour. This wasn't inefficiency. This was structural collapse. And structures leave records. The General Counsel requested the contract history. Every revision. Every approval. Every removed clause. Time-stamped. Documented. Irreversible. I could picture the moment they reached it, the line Victor had deleted. The override. The only mechanism that allowed the system to release funds once verification was triggered. Gone. Not by accident. By decision. Who authorized this change, someone asked. Silence. Then Victor answered. I did. That was the moment the tone shifted. Not louder, sharper. Because now the question wasn't what failed. It was who altered the system that was working. And then came the second layer. My termination. HR records were pulled. Process logs reviewed. Legal compliance checked against internal policy and state law. No notice, no cause, no review. Immediate termination executed during a live contractual negotiation. Even from a distance, I could feel it, the room tightening around him. This may constitute wrongful termination, someone said, but it didn't stop there. Compliance stepped in. Formal inquiry opened. External reporting risk flagged. Audit protocols initiated. And then finally, the sentence that cut through everything. One of the senior attorneys, voice steady, said she didn't break the system. A pause. Then you did. And for the first time, Victor Hale had no one left to interrupt. By the time they finally understood what had happened, I had already made my move. I didn't rush into it. I didn't celebrate. I just chose carefully. The offer from the competitor had been waiting since the moment the system began to lock. They didn't ask unnecessary questions. They didn't pretend this was coincidence. They understood value when they saw it, and more importantly, they understood timing. I accepted. Not out of anger, out of alignment. On my first day, there was no dramatic onboarding, no long introductions. Just a quiet meeting in a glass conference room, and a single question, can they recover? I didn't answer immediately. I reviewed the same contract structure, my structure now broken, on their side, exposed in ways they couldn't repair quickly. They can try, I said. But not without me. And I meant that literally. Back at my former company, the pressure had shifted into desperation. Calls, messages, indirect requests through people who suddenly remembered my name. I ignored all of them, because stepping in now wouldn't fix the system. It would only fix their mistake, and that was no longer my responsibility. Instead, I focused forward. My new team moved quickly, identifying the exact gap left by the frozen deal. Partners who had withdrawn were now open. Markets that had stalled were now unstable. Opportunity doesn't wait, it transfers. And we were ready to receive it. But before anything else, I did one thing. Quietly. Legally. Precisely. I activated a protective clause embedded deep within the original framework, one that governed re-engagement conditions after a compliance-triggered failure. A clause no one had paid attention to. Until now. Because that clause didn't just prevent unauthorized fixes, it prevented re-entry, which meant my former company couldn't simply renegotiate, couldn't restore the deal, couldn't step back into the structure they had broken. Not without rebuilding everything from zero. And by then, we would already be there. By the end of the week, the noise had disappeared, not because the damage was contained, but because the outcome was already decided. Victor Hale was asked to resign. There was no dramatic announcement, no public confrontation, just a formal board vote behind closed doors, followed by a controlled statement citing leadership transition. Clean language, minimal detail. The kind companies use when the truth is too expensive to say out loud. But internally, everyone knew. The deal was gone, not delayed gone. $120 million erased from projections. The 3 withdrawn partners had already realigned elsewhere. Analysts began adjusting forecasts, and the market responded the only way it ever does to uncertainty, with distance. Reputation doesn't collapse all at once. It fractures, then spreads. And this time, the fracture had a name. Victor tried to reach me. Not directly at first. Through intermediaries, former colleagues. A message passed along with careful wording, professional, almost polite. Then less so. Finally, a direct call. I let it ring once before answering. There was no introduction. Just a pause, then his voice lower than I remembered. You could have fixed this. I didn't respond immediately, not because I didn't have an answer, because I wanted him to sit in the silence for a moment. Then I said the only thing that mattered. It was never a small line. No anger, no emphasis. Just the truth stated plainly. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Because by then the consequences had moved beyond the contract. Legal had completed their internal review. Compliance had documented every decision. The board had something far more serious than a failed deal. They had liability. Personal liability. Victor Hale hadn't just made a bad call. He had overridden a validated compliance structure, terminated the responsible authority without cause, and exposed the company to measurable financial damage. That isn't mismanagement. That's breach of fiduciary duty. The lawsuit followed quickly. Not from me. From the company he thought he controlled. And just like everything else, it wasn't emotional. It was procedural. By the time everything settled, my life had already moved forward. At my new company, there was no chaos, no raised voices, no need to prove anything. They had read the situation correctly from the beginning. They didn't see me as difficult. They saw me as infrastructure. I was given space, authority, trust. And with that, I did what I had always done, quietly built systems that worked even when no one was watching. The difference this time was simple. They listened. Weeks passed, then months. The market stabilized, but not for everyone. My former company never fully recovered the position they had lost. Deals like that don't return once confidence is broken. Partners move on. Capital shifts. Reputation recalibrates. Systems remember. And so do people. I didn't follow the headlines closely. I didn't need to. The outcome had already been determined the moment that line was removed. Not revenge. Not even justice in the emotional sense. Just structure doing what it was designed to do. Looking back, I realized something most people miss. It's never the big numbers that hold everything together. It's the small lines, the quiet clauses, the details executives skim past because they don't look important. Until they are. If you've ever been underestimated for protecting something others didn't understand, you already know this feeling. Tell me, where are you listening from? And if this story meant something to you, stay with this channel. Because sometimes the most powerful impact you can have is simply refusing to sign. I never raised my voice. I never fought back. I just stepped aside and let the system remember everything. They thought I was difficult. The system thought I was necessary. There's a moment in situations like this where you realize the real conflict isn't about power, it's about understanding. I didn't lose my job because I was wrong. I lost it because someone chose speed over structure, ego over insight. And that's a lesson that goes far beyond one contract or one company. The things people call small are often the exact points where everything is held together. Ignore them, and the system won't argue, it will simply respond. If you were in that room, would you have signed to stay safe? Or refused and accepted the cost? That's not an easy question. It's a quiet one. And your answer says more about you than any title ever could. What stayed with me isn't the collapse, it's the clarity. Knowing that doing the right thing doesn't always protect you immediately, but it protects something bigger in the long run. If this story made you think or reminded you of something you've experienced, you're already part of why it matters. A single, like a comment or a subscription from you, might help someone else see their situation differently and choose with more clarity, more courage. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.